Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me clearly. A nice little intimate room, so yeah, less people we can really get into detail. So to start off, my name is Obinna Njoku. You can call me Obi, like one can Obi, much easier. I'm the head of automation at HellermannTyton, and in the last decade, I've spent my career building out automation solutions for warehouses and factories. So what you're going to get today is pretty much a very hands-on practical experience over the last decade on where automation pays off and what typically causes it to not pay off. Okay. All right. So most times when we want to automate, people start off this transformation journey with asking the question, should we automate, right? Today, I want to basically say that that is the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, does automation pay back in terms of risk-adjusted returns better than the next best use of capital, right? So it's a competition. Automation initiatives must compete and win the capital allocation discussion, right? It needs to pay back, right? And there are sort of three things that determine the answer to that question, right? First one is the problem you're trying to solve, is it structural or temporary, right? For example, labor costs will continue to rise. That's a structural problem, not temporary. It's not going to go away. You're going to have far less people available for labor or warehouse work, right? Not temporary. That's a structural problem, right? So that's the first question that determines the answer to, that's the first point that determines the answer to that question. The second thing is, do you have the governance maturity to translate technology investment into actual returns? And when I say governance, it goes with everything from the design, the specifications, the demand assumptions, stress testing them, sensitivity analysis. If those aren't right, you will never be set up for success. So it's about your governance maturity to translate technology to return on investment. And the last thing is your deployment discipline, right? And what we're talking about here is pretty much modular, phased deployment. And why you need to do this is to protect capital when assumptions shift. As we know in supply chain, shit happens, right? And when things hit the fan, right, how are you deploying, or what discipline approach did you take to deploy that capital? It's all about capital protection. And that's pretty much that's the crux of this presentation today, right? The wrong question is not whether we should automate, you have to, right? The right question is, can we compete and win for the capital allocation discussion? And can we answer these three questions to support that? Now, the economics are material when there is scale, right? You need scale. If you're a low volume, manufacturer or producer or warehouse, right, and you're thinking about automation, you really need to understand that volume profile, right? This example really just talks about, the difference between manual picking and what we have in goods-to-person picking today. Now, again, you would hear this throughout this presentation. The technology is commoditized. You can buy it anywhere. Everyone's got one. If you went to China, you could get it 40, 60, 70% discount. So it's not the technology, right? It's understanding that business case. And in this, on this slide, what we're trying to really show is a 25p difference in the cost to pick a case. When you look at 20 million cases over an annualized period, you save £5 million. 25p to £5 million. That's significant economic saving that impacts the P&L, but only when scale is present, right? Now, one thing many supply chain managers or transformation managers miss is that they look at capacity metrics, operational metrics, things like OEE, throughput uplift, right? But the sort of advice here today is move that operational metric to a financial one. And the right financial metric to justify automation is cost to serve. And why cost to serve is so important is because it rolls up pretty much all the elements, energy, skills, SKU profiles, stock levels, obsolescence, all of that roll into that cost to serve metric. And when you are doing your business case, if all of these are not in that business case, your board is not seeing the right number. You need to basically frame the automation investment in terms of cost to serve. And then this is also, the other point on this slide that we're going to talk about is pretty much some of the hidden secrets in automation. So one of the interesting conversations we were having just before this session is that typically when you roll out automation technology or automation solutions, it shifts the costs first before it reduces it. And this is where a lot of automation investments typically fall flat. People don't typically cost in the rise in energy cost, right? Or the rise in energy utilization because of a new robotic solution. If you're going from manual to automated, you need to cost that in. When you're going from manual to automated, you also need to cost in people transition to make sure that you have the right skills at go live, right? If you don't have the right skills when you're going live, right, automation will fall flat. And these are some of the hidden costs: energy consumption, maintenance and OEM spares, specialist skills, software license, obsolescence. These are the hidden costs, and they have to be modeled into that business case. So it's a lot of design thinking upfront to make sure that when you model that as is, or when you model the sort of to be situation, you have that properly costed into that business case. And these are where typically I found in the last decade we fall flat because it's not thought of clearly. Now, the next slide basically just talks about how most of the value destruction is self-inflicted. And the story here is about utilization, right? Typically, or in some of your warehouses, you might be half empty. So you might have built 10,000 pallet spaces, and you're using maybe 60, 70% of them, right? It's always about that utilization number. What utilization assumptions went into that business case and was signed off versus what utilization reality are we getting? What this very high level shows you is that pretty much at this sweet spot of 85 to 90% utilization of whatever solution you have, that's when your compounding IRR starts to kick back. Below that, at around 60% value destruction, right? Because you're not utilizing the full capability of the solution, you've basically paid for something you're not using, and you wouldn't get that return on investment, right? Now, what are the common, failure patterns? It's things like, over-engineering, and that's typically because your demand assumptions at the start are either over-bloated because of COVID, for example, right? Or, they're not fully stress tested. It's things like, weak integration, right? You haven't got the right skills to do FATs, SATs, the right success parameters and the right success criteria to determine what does good look like day 1 after this installation and day 90 after this installation. It's those skills, and these are typically where we see things fall flat, right? The main message here is that automation, rewards precision and it penalizes optimism. If, all the way at the start, when you're getting your forecasts, if your forecast accuracy is 50% accurate, it means half the stuff you're making, you shouldn't make them, right? And it's that sort of lag that flows all the way down to making the right or the automation solution oversized. So the message here is we need to make sure that the start, the design, the assumptions, the forecast, the volume analysis is all pretty, tested to very high accuracy levels. The other thing I wanted to just talk about here is about things like quality, compliance, and regulatory drivers. In high pharma environments, regulated FMCG areas, things like quality inspection are part of the requirement. They need to be costed in. Say, for example, if you went with a solution and you didn't involve or you didn't have quality inspection integrated into that solution, what that would mean is that you would land automation and you would need to do quality inspection manually. Again, you've ruined your business case. So it's including, in McKinsey speak, it's MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. You need to make sure that you have that MISI understanding of the requirements for your customers and for your business so that you fully cost the solution and include it in that business case. So when you land it, it's very close to what board approved is very close to what operations is delivering. All right. Now, this is a sort of an interesting slide for me, and this is from personal experience. As you can tell, I'm a very young automation sort of executive, and I've been doing this for a long time. We heard in that initial speech about bold ambitions, bold, thinking big, right? That's what it's all about. Now, there needs to be some constraints on that think big method, mentality, right? Because you need to really understand the constraint, right? And you do not want to sort of automate the ambition. Like I said in the previous slide, automation rewards precision in design and specification and absolutely punishes optimism. So you definitely want to solve the constraint and put your ambition aside, right? And that's the real data-driven approach to actually land this investment to pay back on that P&L, right? Now, what to do, right? You need to identify the bottleneck. Where is the actual constraint? What is the one single constraint your site or your facility or that area is suffering from? Is it space? Is it accuracy? Is it throughput? What exactly is the constraint today? You need to boil down the entire problem to that one single constraint that the business is facing and then design to solve that constraint. If you went in with the ambition, oh, we want a dark factory, or we want a dark ware, oh no, you're gonna blow it, for sure, because you're looking at ambition, not the constraint. Next thing you want to do is quantify the size of the prize. This is my favorite bit, because this is where the money is. The size of the prize is the size of the opportunity. If we did X, this is the direct savings we would have in labor, rent, transport costs, things like that. Quantifying the size of the prize is one of the biggest value adds a transformation manager like myself adds to a business, to be able to say, hey, this is exactly where you're leaking cash, right? And from experience, what we've learned is because automation can get expensive, you really want to really understand how much the size of the prize is, because you will need every dollar of that saving when it comes to calculating your IRR. So you do not want to miss anything here. If labor savings here, you put it in, accuracy savings, rent savings, transport costs, reducing cost to serve, reducing the number of SKUs, everything that this automation or this technology will deliver needs to be quantified in this is the real size of the prize. And that forms your productivity base to then work out, right, if I'm going to save 500,000, very high level, and I wanted it to pay, and I wanted the investment to pay back in under 3 years, I can't spend more than 1.5 million, right? It's all about understanding that size of the prize so that you can work out what your ceiling or investment envelope is to deliver that return on investment in P&L. Next thing is about deploying the minimum viable automation. This is an MVP. Don't go big. Never do the big bang, one hit. Always modular. Start small, see the benefit, justify the benefit, and then go to the next gate. If you started with a big bang, it will fail, pretty much. It's just the way the automation investments work, right? Because when it's big, it's very complex. You don't have the right skills. There's too many, you're not measuring the right metrics. Start small, modular, and grow. And then the last bit is, again, like I said, modular expansion. And this really is for your board, right? Because you can protect capital allocation by being modular and still give the board the optionality that they need, right? Because, like you said, things hit the fan in the supply chain every single day. When assumptions change, when demand forecasts change, signals change, you need the optionality, you need the flexibility to be able to go from packing 200 in a pack to 500 mixed in a pack for retail. You might need something changes, the customer might change. We can't completely forecast exactly what the customer is going to need. So you always need some level of optionality or flexibility. And if you did it in that one big bang, right, the cost of that flexibility is going to overbloat your project, right? Because you're trying to do several different things. But if you went modular, solved your typical Pareto, the 20% of the problems generating 80% of the value, right? Then you start to build that optionality and flexibility for your board, and boards love that. right? That's what really allows you to sign the check, because you're basically saying you're not completely trapped with this investment, with this multi-million-pound investment. If things did change, we do have the options and the alternatives to change. Maybe at a slightly bigger cost, but we will meet our customer requirements and having the optionality. And that's the real picture on making these automation investments pay. Really about solving the constraint and not the one human being sort of superhero big ambition. All right. Operational reality, right? The two main points on here. And again, all of this is being framed in how do we make these distribution investments pay off? And like I talked about before, some of the hidden secrets in automation is that it first shifts the cost before it reduces it, right? So it shifts the cost to higher energy bills, shifts the cost to higher maintenance bills, shifts the cost to higher salaries for higher skilled people, right? And the two of them here are in energy and in labor, right? Now, a conventional warehouse would use something like 8 to 15 kilowatt hours per square foot. Majority of that is in lighting and heating. When you move to a fully automated warehouse, high density storage warehouse, maybe like a 30, 40 meter tall building with cranes and pallet spaces, you pretty much half your energy consumption intensity. So you go to something like 4 to 8 kilowatt hours per square foot. So there are real energy savings by moving to automation. What you need to factor is, now, if I can claim that energy savings, I need to put it in my business case. Because remember, I need to quantify my full size of the prize, because I'm going to need every single dollar in benefits to justify this investment. It's capturing that and understanding that energy shift at the start of your project. And it links to things like sustainability, right? And I'm super passionate about sustainability. I built a lot of playbooks for sustainability on warehouses and factories. And what we see is that when you move from conventional DC to high density storage, you're able to reduce your light utilization, turn off the lights in factions of the warehouse, and completely turn off the heating, right? Because the products don't need to be heated, right? And you're now in a more consolidated area, so you can completely have a dark area and turn off the heating, and that would improve your carbon footprint, right? So these are also claims that you can make with data in that business case, and it starts to improve that business case. The other thing is workforce transition, right? So you've heard, this is almost like, I call it people washing. And you've probably heard several times in transformation discussions and meetings that, hey, we're going to transition this person from a forklift driver to an AGV controller. We're going to transition this person from a picker or sorter to a systems technician. Now, that people transition must be capitalized and costed into the business case. Because if you do not, you will fail at the end. And where you would fail is you wouldn't have the right skills of people at go live to really take this solution forward. So now, typically it's people washing, because when we put it in the business case, the board just wants to hear, we're going to go from 10 people to 5 people. I'm going to fire those 5 people. That's it, right? But what is being missed is the additional training and the skills and the timeline to transition to be able to find the upskilled people that you need to run a more complex facility. Now, however you want to do it within that organization, whether you fire the people and hire new people, great. Fire the people, train, or retrain them and upskill them, up to you. But it must be costed and planned for in the timeline of the business case so that it's fully captured and actually executed. And this is where HR comes in transformation. It's the people transition that they need to be involved in. So these two things are the reality of automation investment, right? Energy costs will typically shift first. You need to understand what that shift is and quantify it. The people transition is typically completely missed because they just assume we're going to fire them, but you'll be left with a big hole at the end. So you must plan for it and make sure you have the right skills at go live to really help you realize the benefits of your automation investment. All right, and that's the reality of the operation. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that the economics of supply are changing. Like I said at the start, it's not really about the technology. In the last year, I've spent something like 6-7 months reviewing something like 60 Asian vendors for AMRs, AGVs and AMRs, specific technology. And what we found was astonishing. You could buy an AMR, same quality, European spec, meets all the standards, 60 to 70% cheaper in China, right? Technology is commoditized. Everyone's got one. It's no longer about the technology. It's governance, and specifically data quality. We heard about this a lot last night, about if you don't have the right data or the right level of quality in your data, it's basically garbage in, garbage out. And understanding that data quality is the real differentiator is the sort of panacea, right? Now, what are we talking about here? On the left, you see a graph. Over the last decade, the cost of robots has pretty much gone down 50%, reinforcing the sort of notion that it's no longer about the technology. It's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper each day, right? Now, that proves that sort of, it gives you the sort of data backing to understand that, yeah, it's really about this, the data. Now, without things like real-time or at least near real-time monitoring, we heard the example with the Ocado, is that on every order, it runs a full demand analysis, so it's nuts. It's really about near real-time data. So if you do not plan to have near real-time data, or you don't have it today, it must be factored into that automation investment decision, because you will not be able to measure, and you can't improve what you don't measure. Now, the other thing we talked about was labor management systems. And one of the examples here is my time at Amazon. I used to be a program manager for benchmarking, and we used to pretty much run the entire shift on labor management systems. It was so good that it basically would know everything that is coming from the order pipeline and tell us in exact terms, this is how many Amazon staff you need to hire to run the shift, and this is how many temporary staff you can use to run the shift, because Amazon staff had a different learning curve than temporary staff, because we hadn't trained them the same, right? So it was a clear, very detailed, recommendation on this is how to staff your shift. And it comes from a strong data discipline. It comes from understanding your full order profile, your stock profile, storage constraints on site, right? And being able to crystallize all of that from data to actual insights so that your team can plan. And it's all about having that labor management system in place. The other thing is about, I think, I've repeated this point, is about governance through data. Data quality is super important. Why? Demand forecasts depend on data. Forecast accuracy depends on data. If that is not sorted at the start and is not mature enough, you will have an oversized automation solution that wouldn't pay back. What should leaders do next, right? And I've tried to categorize this in sort of 4 blocks. The CFO and the finance people, the operations people and the COOs, the people directors, HR, and the transformation lead, right? COO, CFO, you need to reframe the investment business case, and it needs to be around cost to serve. If someone brings a business case that talks about throughput, uplift, OEE alone, kick it back. Ask, go and model the cost to serve, or get as close to a full cost to serve modeling as possible. It's as simple as that. The operations person, the operations director, you need to define the constraint so that people don't run off and automate the ambitions. What is the one single constraint your business faces today? Is it space? Is it throughput? Is it accuracy? Is it people? You need to crystallize it to that one thing, and these are the operations people. What should the people director do? It's about transition, making sure we have the right skill set in the today and in the future to help enable our transformation, right? And it's all about, at the start, you must plan to upskill. You choose. You want to fire them, hire new staff? Up to you. Do you want to upskill them? What do you want to do? It needs to be costed and planned in that. And lastly is the transformation lead. And this is where I've sort of spent my time in the last couple, 5 to 10 years now, is about making sure you have the right measurement. How do you measure success? What does success look like in actual KPI terms? What is the success criteria for an SAT on day 1 of the SAT, day 90 of the SAT, and the full year after? And you know why? Because in the business case, you've promised that in the full year after this technology investment, I'm going to save 5 heads. Now, if no one tracks to see, hey, why are we still, okay, yes, we don't have full-time employees anymore, but the temporary labor spike went up in that department. So the automation is not delivering its productivity. It's not delivering on its business case because no one is actively tracking that metric and feeding that back into finance to see it on the P&L. Everything I sort of try and get my team to do is make sure you're doing anything you do today, make sure it's showing on the P&L. If it doesn't show on the P&L, bump it down to the bottom of the priority list because we're an automation team and we're used as a tool mainly to reduce the bottom line or maybe give a capability for the top line. So it's very clear to us. All right. So that's what I think leaders should do. Now, I'll finish this off on the sort of note that what I've been reiterating. The real competitive edge is not the automation technology. It's the governance. It's the automation governance that determines your success. Now, you need to have precision in specification and designing your requirements. You need to have discipline in deployment, making sure that you can phase the capital and do modular builds. And you need to have optionality, right? To be able to change due to external forces and supply chain forces and customer demand. You need that optionality. And these are the sort of 3 key points that you need to hit to make sure your distribution investment pays off. Hope you enjoyed that and happy to take any questions. All right. Thank you. Chegan, please.
Wonderful presentation. Your experience has definitely been valuable. Very good.
Okay.
My question is around, quick growth in technology, right? So when I see people investing in automation and robots, and 2 years or 3 years after that, there's something new that is delivering 20, 30, 50% more, and you're looking like, I just spent 5 million, have you experienced that and how have you managed that? That's the first one.
Yep.
The second one is one that we found and we deployed, which is automation as a service, right? So rather than actually buy the robots and all of that, we have companies that own them and they deploy them to us as a service. It's kind of like Uber, really. You don't own them, and so you don't do capex, right? Everything goes into OPEX. How has that? And I think we're able to do that because what we were buying in terms of size and spend was what we were buying. Yes, was small, but in the case of an entire warehouse, have you seen that kind of scenarios where as automation as a service?
Absolutely. All right, good question, Segun. Thank you for those questions. So I'll answer the questions from the back. And the first question I'll answer is about robots as a service, RaaS. Right. Now, the big watch out there is, yes, it typically changes the conversation from capital allocation to OPEX because you're renting the asset. But think about it like a car lease. Total cost of ownership of that robot will become expensive at the end of the day, right? Because whoever is leasing that to you has put the interest and the cost of capital, and it's basically like a car lease. So you usually run into that constraint of total cost of ownership, right? And it's a lease versus buy decision. Now, at cash-rich businesses, Pepsi, Amazon, cash is not the problem. We've got the cash sitting there. So we would rather typically favor buy, right? But in e-commerce environments where demand could flex literally in the last 3 months of the year, November, December, September, October, November, December, you might benefit from having a RaaS model that can help you meet that demand in only those last 3 months of the year. So the short answer, yes. I have, experienced a lot of robotics as a service. It's something that Goldman Sachs has really been pushing through. A lot of people like Locus Robotics, several AMR Robotics, even I think ABB and KUKA also do that. But the real watch out is total cost of ownership. What is the total cost of ownership of that asset over 10 years? And it's then a business decision to then say, right, we're happy to accept this total cost of ownership. And depending on our demand profile, we can either do the lease versus buy to meet the demand. So it's not a clear-cut answer. It does depend on the business. It does depend on, what is that business trying to do? What is the business risks appetite on buy versus lease? Now, in terms of how fast demand changes or situations change. That's why I talked about a lot about optionality and flexibility. So we do have quite a number of scenarios where we've invested in high bay warehouses with huge cranes, right? Lifting, 1-ton pallets and things like that. And we've come to installation because these projects typically take anywhere from 2 to 3 years from inception to actual delivery. And by the time you get to that 3 years, demand has changed. Your warehouse is now pretty much 50% empty, and maybe Exotech has come in with a much cheaper goods-to-person ASRS system. Short answer is you're pretty much screwed if that happens, right? Because remember that utilization number? Your utilization number will be below where your IRR starts to compound. Now, if you've done, and that's typically where you've done it in a big bang. But if you had adopted a modular approach, you would still have the ability to change, right? Because within 3 years, you would say, look, we'll deliver phase 1, and let's say the full spec is 20,000 pallets. We'll deliver the first 10,000 pallets and see how that performs. That's at day 1 of year 3, right? But by the time demand signals start changing, but before we go to phase 2 to roll out the next modular bit, again, we sit with a cross-functional team and say, hey, what are the assumptions that have changed? Do we still have the same demand profile, the same SKU profile, the same constraints? Should we go forward to phase 2? That's the discussion that sort of typically manages that. But in my experience, yes, it does happen a lot, and that's where the automation investment fails, right? And immediately when that happens, people start pointing at the technology. But it's not the technology. The governance was the problem. We didn't stress test our demand assumptions, utilization sensitivity. We didn't do all of that. That's why we fell flat. And that's the lesson that I've got from that experience. All right. Hope I answered that. Perfect. Over to you.
First of all, thanks for the presentation. I really like because you're very honest and open, and you really give us the benefits and the risks. And I want to ask you a question which I'm wondering, and I don't know because I'm not an expert, but you say to do an automation, it's a big investment, it's a long project. You have to stress test it, and you have to make sure that your warehouse has the right capacity to make it pay off. Now, if the demand profile changes, if the type of deliveries to the customers changes, the automation isn't always as agile to adjust to a new profile, to adjust to lower capacities, etc. So aren't we better off waiting a couple of years until humanoid robots are ready, and then we just exchange our workforce with them and have a more flexible setup?
Honestly, the way I answer that is because Amazon will not wait. They will keep investing in robots and automation. If you wait, by the time you're waiting, it's too late. Experimentation must come in. Risk-taking must come in, right? And the real competition, Amazon. Amazon has a 7, 8, 10-year head start on reducing cost to serve, on meeting the customer. They can deliver whatever you order within an hour, right? So it's because the market wouldn't wait. Other businesses will still keep experimenting. So it's, almost saying, we need to be able to take that risk, right? Yes, we wouldn't have 100% of the picture, but as long as we follow the sort of, discipline and diligence to get 70, 80% of the data, we should take that risk. And the reason is because our competitors will not wait. And business is all about speed, right? It's all about who has the advantage. It's just the way of things, right? We can't sit and do nothing. If not, by the time we start doing, we'll be left behind and can't catch up. That's how I would see that. Oh, welcome. All right, we run out of all the questions. Thank you very much, everyone. Looking forward to more discussions. All right.